Part 3, Chapter 7, Funeral Games. 2 days were spent by the Greeks over the burial of Patroclus. First they piled up great logs for the burning, and brought out the body in procession to lay it on top. Each man put a lock of his hair on the dead man's bier for remembrance, while Achilles placed treasures at his feet for him to take down into the land of the dead. All day the Greeks were busy with sacrifices and prayers to the gods until evening came, when Achilles kindled the fire. The huge pyre burned all night long, while Achilles, standing in the red firelight, drew wine from a golden bowl and poured it out on the earth, calling again and again on the spirits of Patroclus. When at last all was burned to gray ashes, the Myrmidons heaped up a great mound as a memorial to their companion, and Achilles sent criers through the camp to proclaim games to Patroclus' honor. The people came out from their huts and gathered about the prizes that Achilles had brought out for the chariot race. 5 heroes were contending in this, and Achilles set out a prize for each, so that none might go away without a memorial. Men marked out a course to a withered stump, with 2 white stones by its base, around which the chariots were to swing and return to their starting place. The 5 heroes lifted up their whips and rushed forward, side by side in a whirlwind of dust. The light, springless chariots shook, rocked, or bounded into the air, while the riders balanced as best they might, feet well apart, whip in one hand and reins in the other. Had not the floors of the chariots been made of woven straps, which gave somewhat under their riders, one or other of the heroes would surely have been thrown out and broken his neck. As it was, the chariots rattled and crashed, and the drivers swayed madly while they shouted aloud and laid on the lash. Eumelus shot out ahead with Diomedes so close behind him that the front hooves of his horses seemed about to mount Eumelus's car. Suddenly, the chariot of Eumelus hit a rock, bounded up, and dropped back to earth with such a crash that its pole broke clear through. The horses rushed on, and Eumelus, whose hands were entangled in the reins, was dragged clear over the rail of a shattered car and over the stony ground. He got to his feet after a time and checked his horses. Meanwhile, Diomedes, driving with consummate skill, had avoided the crash and was already rounding the terminal post far ahead of the others. The next pair were King Menelaus and Antilochus, the young son of Nestor. Menelaus was slightly ahead, and Antilochus doubted whether his horses had enough speed to outrace the king. He waited, therefore, until he saw the track enter a hollow with steep banks on either side. As Menelaus approached this, Antilochus lashed up his horses until the 2 chariots were racing madly abreast. "Keep back!" shouted Menelaus furiously. "Here the track is not wide enough for 2. Antilochus, who was younger and more reckless, responded by flogging his horses on with all his might. Menelaus reined back violently, and Antilochus swept past. Before the infuriated king could regain his speed, his young rival was a fair stone's throw ahead. "Diomedes is the winner," announced Achilles, advancing to greet the successful companion. "Eumelus here shall have a special prize for the sake of his injury, and because his horses were really the swiftest. No man should feel that he does not get his deserts today. Antilochus takes 2nd prize, and Menelaus the 3rd. "This is not fair," burst out Menelaus, pushing forward. "My horses are better, and Antilochus only pushed his head by reckless driving. He forced me to rein back in order to save his life and my own." Antilochus looked at the angry king, reflecting that it was not wise to offend the brother of Agamemnon. He smiled a little, triumphing inwardly because he had in fact come in 2nd. Nevertheless, he said readily, "Take the 2nd prize, King Menelaus. I am young and hasty, but I know it is not for me to contend with my elders." "I will do so," replied Menelaus, still offended. "Another time, be less ready to play tricks on men who are better than you." Antilochus now took the 3rd prize with a good grace, and Meriones, who came in last, was awarded the 4th. Achilles took up the 5th prize, a 2-handed urn that now stood unclaimed, and turned toward Nestor. "Old man," he said, "the day is past when you could share in these sports, though once you were famous. I would not have you go away, however, without some memorial of the burying of Patroclus." "You speak well," answered the gratified old man, wagging his beard with approval. "I was indeed famous in times long gone by when no man could match me in wrestling or running. Now I thank you for this fair gift in memory of Patroclus. But if I were younger, I would challenge you all, for there were better men in those days." Achilles listened with respect to the old man's harmless vanity, for it was true that few at his age could still go out to war. At this point, however, the prizes were being brought out for the boxing. Achilles announced that he would give a mule to the first man, and to his opponent a two-handled cup. None of the great heroes volunteered for the boxing, which was a brutal sport, the hands of the contestants being bound with straps studded with metal. 2 men stood up, but only one claimed his own prize after the contest. The other was carried off the field, and his friends went up to fetch him the two-handled cup. Odysseus now prepared to wrestle with Ajax, who at first sight seemed easily the stronger, for he was taller by more than a head. Odysseus, however, had great shoulders and powerful arms, though his legs were short. For a while the two heroes swayed back and forth while their backs creaked with the strain, and sweat poured from them in streams. At last Ajax put forth his great strength and lifted his enemy, hoping to dash him to the ground. Odysseus swiftly hit him behind the knee and twisted around to fall on his chest as he collapsed. The first fall thus went to Odysseus, who now in his turn tried to lift Ajax but could not. The giant swayed a little, slightly off balance. With a sudden thrust, Odysseus crooked his knee behind his opponent's, bringing him once more to the ground. "This is a victory of skill over strength," said the heroes, as Odysseus came forward to take away his prize, while Ajax stood sullenly by. "Who will run in the foot race?" demanded Achilles quickly, because he saw that Ajax was much moved and could scarcely conceal his resentment. At Achilles' words there was a slight pause, for he himself was by far the swiftest runner in the host. Soon, however, the other, Ajax, Oileus' son, stepped forward. After him, Odysseus and young Antilochus volunteered to try for the prize. Of these, Ajax ran the fastest, but by very little, since Odysseus trod right in his footprints before the dust had settled back on the ground. Just in front of the goal, Ajax slipped and fell headlong, for Athena wished to honor Odysseus, who was always dear to her. "It is easy to see that the gods prefer older men," commented Antilochus, smiling as he took the third prize. "Ajax Oileus is older than I, while Odysseus is of an earlier generation altogether, although few but Achilles can rival him in speed." Agamemnon now arose to cast the javelin, and against him was set Meriones, a brave charioteer. When Achilles saw how unequal was the rank of the contestants, he interposed, wishing no awkwardness to arise upon that day. "King Agamemnon," said he, "we all know that you excel in this sport. Take the first prize without a contestant, and let me give Meriones the second, if he is willing." Both champions gladly agreed to avoid a trial of skill, while the bystanders praised Achilles for his ready tact. As the games broke up, the heroes spoke much of the noble funeral Achilles had made for his comrade. All went back to their huts contented, except for Achilles. Bitter sorrow still gnawed at his heart, for neither vengeance nor the honors he had paid to his friends had reconciled him to his loss. Twice he started up from his bed and went out to roam wildly by the seashore, and listened to the moaning of the waves. When dawn came, he yoked the horses to his chariot and savagely dragged Hector's body round and round Patroclus' tomb. Even this brought him no comfort. He left Hector lying in the dust and went wearily back to his hut. Part 3, Chapter 8, The Ransom. Swift Iris, darting down like a ray of light from Olympus, came to Priam, who was sitting in the courtyard of his palace, mourning for his son. "Get up, King Priam, and be of good courage," said she, "for Zeus has sent me. Go out into the camp of the Greeks and buy back the body of Hector. Fierce Achilles shall do you no harm, for the gods will watch over you." The old man cast off the dark cloak enwrapping him and turned to his astonished sons, who were sitting in a circle about him, silently respecting his grief. "Bind a wicker cart to its framework, harness it with mules, and bid my servant Idaeus to be ready to drive it. Make me ready also a chariot for myself. With my own ears, just now I heard the command of Zeus." King Priam went in out of the sunlight to his cool, dark house, which resounded with the wailing of women for Hector. Around the walls of his chamber stood great chests that held beautiful garments, jewels, cups, bars of gold, and many other things of great price. "Why are you taking out your treasures?" asked his wife wearily, finding him there. "Surely you cannot have need of them at this time of sorrow." "I am going out to ransom the body of our son from Achilles," he declared. "Are you out of your mind?" she cried shrilly. "The gods have promised me protection," he answered, and left her wringing her hands. Dusk had fallen before the mule cart was loaded, and the old man and his servant were ready to drive out of the town. The anxious watchers from the city lost sight of them in the darkness, but Zeus, who saw all things from Olympus, watched them strike out across the plain. "Go down and guide them," said he, turning to Hermes. "Bring them safe to Achilles through the midst of the enemy's camp." Hermes, bound on his golden-winged sandals that carried him like the wind, came swiftly to Troy from Olympus, running lightly over the sea. Here he changed himself to the shape of a very young prince, with the first down of manhood still on his chin. "Where are you going, old man?" said he kindly, stepping out to meet King Priam from behind a tall grave mound that rose on the plain. "You are very near the camp of your enemies, and will soon run into danger. Dark though the night has become, I am one of the Myrmidons, a squire of Achilles, and I will guide you into safety in memory of my father, who is old and resembles you." "Young squire of Achilles," said the old man desperately, encouraged by the friendly tone of the god, "tell me the truth. Does Hector's body still lie in the dirt by the tents of the Myrmidons?" "It lies by the tomb of Patroclus, round which Achilles daily drags it, hoping vainly to comfort himself for the loss of his friend." King Priam took forth a cup of great value and pressed it on Hermes. "Take this gift," said he, "if you will guide me to the hut of Achilles." The seeming squire drew back with contempt. "I do not need to be bribed," he said haughtily. "I will go with you because you are old and for this courtesy's sake." The god leaped into the chariot and drove it toward the trench, in front of which the Greek sentries sat cooking their supper. King Priam shrank back behind his young guide as they approached the firelight, but to his astonishment, though the pot boiled on the fire, the men lay about it fast asleep. Hermes, who had enchanted their eyes, smiled gently, and drove through the camp, in which he had charmed even the dogs into unconsciousness. The hut of Achilles had a great courtyard all about it, and was fenced in by a high palisade. Hermes unbarred the great gate, and drove quietly in. Priam, alighting stiffly from the chariot, walked over to the door of the hut. Achilles sat alone by a little table with two squires busy in attendance. Backs to the doorway, in a moment, Priam had crossed the floor and fallen on the ground before the knees of Achilles, while he kissed the terrible hands that had slain so many of his sons. "Achilles," he implored, "think of your own father, who is old and lonely as I. Yet, while he struggles desperately in his unruly kingdom far away, he still has hope that his great son will return to his aid. I once had 50 sons, but the greater part are dead, and now Hector, the best of them all, will never come back to me or to my country in our need. Have pity and at least let me buy back the body for burial. I must be the first man on earth who has gone so far as to kiss the hands of the slayer of so many sons." Sorrow welled up again in the heart of Achilles, but at the piteous sight of old Priam, all bitterness left him at last. He moved the old man gently aside and covered his face. Both wept, Priam for his son, and Achilles for his lonely old father, and for dead Patroclus. "Get up, old man," said Achilles at last very kindly. "Our griefs are only the common lot of mankind. After all, my father Peleus was a hero once, and the richest and happiest of kings. What use was his fortune, however, when he begot an only son who was fated to die very young? Even while I live, I am no comfort or help to my father, but am fighting here very far from my country, making misery for you and your children. You too were once happy and powerful, but now battle and death have swept all your good fortune away." The old man looked at him without moving. "Get up," said Achilles again. "What use is all our lamentation?" he added, sighing heavily. "We cannot raise those we love from the dead." "Hector lies on the bare ground," Priam persisted. "Why should I not?" "I will fetch you your son," said Achilles, rising to go out and summon his men. When he had delivered the body of Hector to his followers to be washed and wrapped in fine garments before it was laid on the mule cart of Priam, Achilles turned to the grave of Patroclus and spoke to the spirit of the dead. "Patroclus," cried he, "do not be angry if I give back Hector's body to his father. We have had revenge, but it is no use to us at all. It is better for your memory's sake that I take fitting ransom from Priam." The dark grave made no answer, but Achilles felt the consent of his friend deep in his heart. Priam sat huddled in a chair by the hearth, trembling from head to foot, overcome by the reaction from his former courage, which had been born of despair. Achilles looked down at the old wrinkled face and the furrows from the corners of the eyes that marked the track of tears. "Let us eat and drink quietly together," said he kindly, seeing that the old man was incapable of rising. "Afterward you shall sleep a little before you take Hector home. I have not closed my eyes since the death of Patroclus, but now at last my heart is at peace." Part 4, Chapter 1. The Queen of the Amazons. Men were running to lift down their weapons from the wall and hastily putting on their armor. Once more, the rumbling of chariots and the neighing of horses were heard in the streets of Troy. For many days after the death of Hector, the leaderless Trojans had despaired of ever driving the Greeks into the sea. Deiphobus and Helenus, now the greatest of the princes, were hardly friends with one another, though they both resented the rivalry of Iones, since he was not one of Priam's sons. The peace party, headed by Polydamas and Antenor, was openly seeking support from the people, even though no one could suggest any terms the victorious Greeks would be likely to accept. Discouraged and frightened, the Trojans had huddled inside the walls of their city, where they might soon have been closely besieged if Achilles had not held back the Greeks in order to give Priam a breathing space for celebrating Hector's funeral. 12 days were now over, and contrary to all expectations, the Trojans were going out again to war. In the midst of doubting and despair, a new champion had come to their aid. This was Penthesilea, Queen of the Amazons, a nation of warrior women. She was even now riding across the great square on her way from the palace of Priam to the Scaean gate, amid the cheers of the men and women who thronged the streets. Only white-faced Andromache watched doubtfully, half hidden behind the colonnade of Hector's house. "Hector was a warrior," she said softly, "but this is a young girl as slender as I. How can she be a match for Achilles, as she boasts? She does not really understand war." For a moment the townspeople had forgotten Hector, absorbed in this new wonder which had appeared to save them. Penthesilea sat astride a fiery white horse, and from the waving crest of her helmet to the sandals on her feet, she glittered with gold. Slender though she was, she easily carried a round shield with 2 javelins fastened behind it, while her right hand grasped a huge spear. From a broad belt across her shoulders hung a sword in a scabbard of ivory and silver. She appeared to wear her heavy armor, and to manage her horses with lightness and grace of the huntress Artemis. Behind her rode a guard of Amazons, 2 and 2. All were young, but none rivaled the queen, whose helmet was pushed back on her forehead, uncovering her lovely face, delicately flushed with excitement, as she raised her spear in answer to the Trojan cheers. The great gates were swinging open, and soon the shouting crowd of Trojans was swarming out to battle. Penthesilea set her horse to a gallop, and with a wild cry she and her guards tore across the plain, followed by the rocking chariots of the princes and the rabble of light-armed troops racing behind them on foot. Scouts rushed into the camp of the Greeks to find the army unbelieving and unprepared. "They will not dare to challenge us seriously," said Achilles to Ajax, who stood with him by the mound of Patroclus, making sacrifices to the spirit of the dead. "They have been too terribly beaten to be dangerous. There is no need to interrupt our rites." Elsewhere in the camp, men rushed for their arms and poured out onto the plain confusedly, each when he was ready. Penthesilea, with her maidens behind her, fell on them like the goddess of war. The first to meet the onset of the Amazons were the men of Protesilaus, led by Podarces, the dead hero's brother. 6 of these fell to the queen's spear and were trampled beneath the red hooves of her plunging horse. Meantime, Clone, the maiden on her right hand, laid low Menippus, Podarces' greatest friend, and at that Podarces himself, with a great shout, aimed his spear at Clone and hurled her dying from her horse. Penthesilea, turning on him like a fury, stabbed him through the arm. The blood spurted forth like a fountain, and Podarces died in his friend's arms as he was being carried out of the battle. At the loss of their leader, the men facing the Amazons turned to flee with cries of dismay. They were, however, caught between the Amazons and the Greek forces still pushing out to the battle, so that many of them died from a thrust in the back or turned to face their enemies unprotected, since they had thrown away their shields. In vain did Diomede leap forward and take the life of a maiden as the group rode thundering past. In vain did fresh forces run up to the rescue. The main body of Trojans was up with the Amazons by now, and their impetus was not to be stayed. The Greeks were rolled back to their camp with the great white horse of Penthesilea racing at the head of the pursuit. As the roar of battle rolled down on the Greek camp, Achilles and Ajax, roused by the noise, issued from the gate like two lions and charged out onto the advancing foes. The Greeks rallied with them and fell on the Amazons, who were soon entangled in a mass of men, among whom their desperate valor did fearful execution. Achilles and Ajax cut through the throng towards Penthesilea, killing as they went. She, seizing one of her javelins, hurled it at Achilles, but saw it shatter to fragments against the shield a god had made. Swift as a flash, she plucked forth the second and aimed it at Ajax, but in her haste, her aim was poor. The weapon glanced off his silver greave, and the giant laughed at her as he plunged past to fall on the Trojans behind her. Achilles flung up his spear and hit Penthesilea full in the breast. She rocked in the saddle, fumbling blindly for her sword. Long before she could draw it, however, the hero stabbed upward at the plunging horse with such force that the spear went right through her breast and rider. Both fell with a crash to the earth. The Trojans turned and fled desperately, their short-lived courage entirely gone. Achilles, however, did not join the pursuit. "Foolish woman," said he, stooping over the dead queen's body, "who persuaded you that you were strong enough to fight with men?" He wrenched off her helmet roughly and then stopped with it in his hand, staring. The queen lay lovely and fresh as a wild rose on the blood-stained field. Her beautiful lips were parted a little as though she still breathed, and her soft hair had fallen about her shoulders, shining in the sun. Achilles straightened up slowly, still looking at her. "It is a pity that one so fair should die so young," he said. "Had I been fated to go home with the Myrmidons and be king in my father's room, what better queen could I have set by my side than this girl with the gallantry of a warrior and the beauty of a nymph? I could have loved her, but instead I have killed her. The price of glory is high indeed, for it is always bought by death."